September 21st, 1945. Camp Deming, New Mexico. Pre-dawn darkness. Georg Gärtner crouches against the wire fence, listening to the guard tower footsteps fade. 23 years old, Africa Corps veteran, prisoner number 311420. He's wearing 2 pairs of trousers, 3 shirts, everything he owns layered against the desert cold. The fence opens where he's been loosening it for 6 weeks. 1 strand at a time, bent back during work details, camouflaged with dust. Gärtner slides through on his stomach, feeling wire scrape his back. Then he's outside the compound, outside American custody, outside the only world he's known for 2 years. He stands in New Mexico darkness. No elaborate plan for Mexico or South America. Just one objective: disappear into America before anyone realizes he's gone. Gärtner knows the statistics. Over 425,000 German POWs were held in the United States. More than 2,000 escape attempts. Every single escapee recaptured within days, most within hours. But Georg Gärtner has advantages. He speaks fluent English learned from his American grandmother. He studied American geography and culture obsessively since capture, and he possesses absolute determination never to return to Soviet-occupied Germany. What Gärtner doesn't know is that he's about to accomplish what 2,000 other prisoners failed to achieve. He will walk away from Camp Deming and disappear so completely that the US government will close his file as unsolved. He will not be recaptured in days, not in weeks, not in years. Georg Gärtner, prisoner 311420, will vanish into America for 40 years. He will build a life, assume an identity, become American in everything but paperwork. He will live in plain sight while the FBI searches, will work alongside veterans who fought Germany, will settle in California suburbs while remaining the only German POW who successfully escaped American custody and stayed free. The guard tower searchlight sweeps the compound. Gärtner drops flat against desert sand. When the light passes, he stands and begins walking. Not south toward Mexico, east, deeper into the American Southwest, into the vast interior where one more displaced worker in post-war America will attract no attention whatsoever. Subscribe to see how one man walked out of an American POW camp and into American society. September 21st, 1945. Georg Gärtner walks east into darkness. He has no food, no money, no plan beyond reaching the first town and finding work. The American government will search for him for years before giving up. They're looking for a German prisoner trying to flee the country. They'll never find him, because Georg Gärtner isn't fleeing. He's settling in, and by the time they start looking, he no longer exists. Georg Gärtner didn't spontaneously decide to escape. He'd been planning since capture 18 months earlier. March 1944, North Africa. Gärtner was serving with an Africa Corps anti-aircraft unit when Allied forces overwhelmed German positions in Tunisia. He was 21 years old, but personal pride didn't drive his escape planning. Fear did. Gärtner heard about Soviet treatment of German prisoners. Repatriation to occupied Germany might mean transfer to Soviet custody. Execution as war criminals, forced labor in Siberian camps, show trials for military service. Gärtner calculated. Staying in American custody until repatriation meant probable death in the Soviet system. Escaping meant a chance at survival, even if impossibly small. The journey from North Africa to the United States took 2 months. Gärtner traveled by ship from Tunisia to Norfolk, Virginia, then by train through the South, finally arriving at Camp Deming in May 1944. Each stage, he observed, security procedures, guard rotations, how Americans spoke, what they valued. Camp Deming held approximately 3,000 German POWs. The camp sprawled across desert scrubland, 15 miles from the town of Deming, surrounded by hostile terrain where summer temperatures exceeded 105 degrees and winter nights dropped below freezing. The Geneva Convention governed POW treatment. Prisoners received adequate food, medical care, and working conditions meeting international standards. Many German prisoners found American captivity surprisingly comfortable. They worked on farms, in factories, doing labor that addressed America's wartime manpower shortage. Gärtner worked these details willingly, not because he'd resigned himself to imprisonment, but because work details offered opportunities to observe America beyond the fence. He picked cotton on New Mexico farms. He cleared irrigation ditches. He helped construct buildings. Each job provided intelligence, road networks, distances between communities, how American workers dressed and behaved, where a man might blend in unnoticed. He also continued the English education his American grandmother had started before the war. Gärtner's maternal grandmother had emigrated from the United States to marry a German engineer, living in Germany through the 1920s and 1930s. She'd taught young Georg to speak English with a minimal accent, a skill that became potentially life-saving as a prisoner. Other prisoners knew Gärtner spoke English. They didn't know how well. He deliberately maintained a heavy accent when speaking with guards, played up difficulty with American idioms, and presented himself as another German prisoner struggling with the language. This deception was calculated. When he escaped, guards would report a prisoner with limited English, making his eventual disappearance into American society seem implausible to investigators. By summer 1945, Gärtner had assembled necessary knowledge. He knew guard rotation schedules, when towers were minimally staffed, when relief shifts created brief gaps in surveillance. He knew fence weak points. He knew which guards were conscientious and which were counting days until discharge. Germany's surrender in May 1945 changed the equation fundamentally. Repatriation was no longer theoretical. It was imminent. The US government began planning to return German prisoners to occupied Germany starting in 1946. For Gärtner, this timeline created urgency. He also recognized a crucial advantage. The war was over. American guards, many of them draftees eager to return to civilian life, had relaxed. Security procedures designed for wartime gradually eroded. The Japanese surrender in August 1945 accelerated this erosion. Gärtner planned his escape for September specifically. Summer heat had passed, making desert travel survivable. But cold weather hadn't arrived, meaning he could travel at night without freezing. The psychological preparation was equally important. Gärtner understood that escaping the camp was the easy part. Staying free required transforming completely, abandoning his identity, his language patterns, his mannerisms, everything marking him as German. He accumulated small advantages. Civilian-style work pants obtained during labor detail, a shirt that didn't look military, boots worn down to appear less institutional. What Gärtner couldn't prepare for was the psychological isolation ahead. Escaping meant severing all connection to his past. No contact with family in Germany, no opportunity to speak German or acknowledge his real identity. September 20th, 1945. Gärtner made final preparations. He volunteered for late mess duty, knowing it would place him near the perimeter after dark. He hid the extra clothing. He memorized the guard rotation one last time. At 2:15 a.m. on September 21st, during shift change when tower coverage briefly overlapped and attention divided, Georg Gärtner crawled through the fence he'd spent 6 weeks preparing and began walking east into darkness. Behind him, 3,000 German prisoners slept. Within days, most would assume he'd been recaptured like every other escapee. But Georg Gärtner would not be recaptured. He would become the exception. The one prisoner out of 425,000 who successfully escaped American custody and stayed free. Georg Gärtner walked through the New Mexico night with no destination beyond away from here. He had only one strategy: become American so thoroughly that no one would think to question him. The first 72 hours were the most dangerous. Camp Deming discovered his absence within hours of dawn on September 21st. Alerts went out to local law enforcement, FBI field offices across the Southwest, and Border Patrol stations. His description circulated: 5 feet 9 inches, 160 pounds, blue eyes, brown hair, speaks English with German accent, considered likely to attempt border crossing into Mexico. But Gärtner wasn't heading toward any border. He was walking deeper into New Mexico, toward small towns where transient workers appeared and disappeared with seasonal work. In post-war America, millions of people were relocating, veterans returning home, workers moving to new opportunities. One more man passing through attracted minimal attention. By the second night, Gärtner reached a small town. He simply removed identifiable German markings from his work clothes and presented himself as an itinerant laborer. The critical moment came when he chose his American identity. He needed a name, something common enough not to stand out, but uncommon enough that coincidental meetings with the real person would be unlikely. He chose Dennis Wiles. Dennis Wiles took his first steps into American society. He found day labor work, picking crops, clearing land, construction jobs that required strong backs and few questions. He was paid in cash. He moved frequently. He spoke as little as necessary, claiming to be from Oklahoma when asked. The FBI searched for Georg Gärtner, but they were looking for a German prisoner attempting to flee the country. They watched border crossings, monitored ports, tracked down tips about Germans in immigrant communities. They weren't looking for a quiet laborer working construction in small Southwest towns. Within weeks, Gärtner had earned enough money to purchase better civilian clothes. Each item moved him further from the image of an escaped POW and closer to the anonymous American worker he was becoming. By October 1945, Dennis Wiles had moved to Albuquerque. By December, he'd worked his way to California. Each move took him further from New Mexico, deeper into the vastness of post-war America. The pattern Gärtner followed would sustain him for years: take jobs requiring minimal documentation, stay long enough to earn money, but not long enough to form deep connections, move before anyone started asking detailed questions. In 1950, Gärtner took the calculated risk that would make his transformation permanent. He applied for a Social Security number under the Dennis Wiles identity. This required obtaining a birth certificate, which Gärtner managed by requesting one from Oklahoma for a Dennis Wiles who had died in infancy, a practice called ghosting that was easier before computerized vital record systems. The Social Security number changed everything. With it, Dennis Wiles could work legitimate jobs, pay taxes, and build an official employment history. Paradoxically, becoming more documented made him safer. By 1952, Gärtner had settled in California. He worked as a carpenter and handyman, building houses during California's post-war construction boom. He rented apartments, maintained a low profile, and cultivated the image of a reliable but reserved worker. The fear of discovery never disappeared. Every police car made his heart race. Every knock on the door created panic. But months passed without incident, then years. The FBI's active search cooled as other priorities emerged. Georg Gärtner's file moved to inactive status, marked fugitive, whereabouts unknown. By the late 1950s, Dennis Wiles had achieved something remarkable: normalcy. He had a steady job, paid rent, and participated in ordinary American life. In 1958, Gärtner married a woman named Jean. The marriage lasted 4 years before ending in divorce, not because Jean discovered his secret, she never did, but because the emotional distance required to maintain his deception made genuine intimacy impossible. By the 1960s, Georg Gärtner had been Dennis Wiles longer than he'd been a prisoner. The German soldier was a fading memory. The American handyman was his lived reality. But internally, the isolation was absolute. He had no one who knew his real identity, no one who spoke German with him, no one who understood his actual history. September 1985, 40 years after his escape. Georg Gärtner was 63 years old, living in San Diego, working as a maintenance technician. Dennis Wiles had been his identity longer than Georg Gärtner ever was. But mortality approached. Health problems suggested his remaining years were limited. He faced a question haunting him. Would Georg Gärtner simply disappear forever, erased completely by the false identity that protected him? Practical concerns had diminished. 40 years had passed. Statutes of limitations had expired. The US military had stopped actively searching for escaped POWs decades earlier. But Gärtner didn't want legal absolution. He wanted his real identity acknowledged before he died. Dying as Dennis Wiles, buried under a false name with no one knowing the truth, had become unbearable. In September 1985, Gärtner contacted a German-language newspaper in California. He told an editor he had information about a German POW who'd escaped American custody and lived free for 40 years. When Gärtner arrived for the interview, he handed the editor his original Wehrmacht identification papers, carefully preserved through 4 decades. "I am the escaped prisoner," he said in German. "My name is Georg Gärtner." The interview lasted 4 hours. Gärtner described his capture in North Africa, imprisonment at Camp Deming, his escape, and 40-year transformation into Dennis Wiles. The newspaper published Gärtner's confession in October 1985. The American media picked it up immediately. By November, Georg Gärtner was national news. The FBI reopened the old file. Military officials discussed possible prosecution. But public sentiment favored Gärtner. He'd committed no crimes beyond escaping custody and identity fraud. He'd worked, paid taxes, lived as a model citizen for 4 decades. Veterans groups defended him. One veteran wrote, "He fought for his country, we fought for ours. The war ended 40 years ago. Let the man live in peace." The military announced it would not pursue prosecution. Georg Gärtner was officially free. The relief was overwhelming. For the first time since 1945, he could speak German publicly, acknowledge his real history, and exist as himself. But revelation created unexpected problems. Jeanne, his ex-wife, learned from newspapers that Dennis Wiles had never existed. She gave an interview describing the betrayal. "I thought I knew him. Our entire marriage was built on lies. Co-workers and neighbors experienced similar shocks. Some felt betrayed, others were fascinated. Gärtner himself struggled with the transition. He'd been Dennis Wiles for 40 years. That identity felt more real than Georg Gärtner in many ways. He mourned the loss of Dennis Wiles, even though Dennis had been a fiction. In 1986, Gärtner traveled to Germany for the first time since capture. His family had believed him dead for 40 years. His mother died in 1962, thinking her son was killed in North Africa. His siblings were shocked to discover he'd been alive in America the entire time. The reunion was complex. Joy at his survival, mixed with anger that he'd never contacted them. Profound grief for decades lost. In 1992, Gärtner published a book about his experience, Hitler's Last Soldier in America. The book provided a full account of his 40-year deception. He died in February 2013 at age 90, having outlived his secret identity by 28 years. The United States military released a statement noting that Gärtner was the only German POW to successfully escape American custody and remain free. Of 2,222 documented escape attempts by German prisoners during World War II, Every other escapee was recaptured. Historians studying Gärtner's escape identify several factors enabling his success. His fluent English eliminated the language barrier that doomed other escapees. His decision to disappear into America rather than fleeing to Mexico defied prediction. His choice to build legitimate identity with documentation made him invisible through normalcy. But the most important factor was timing. Gärtner escaped in September 1945, just weeks after war's end, when American military authorities were demobilizing rather than tightening security. In his final interviews, Gärtner reflected on his 40 years as Dennis Wiles. "I was both people," he said. "Georg Gärtner was who I was born as. Dennis Wiles was who I became." Maybe that's what America means, the possibility of becoming someone different than who you were born to be. He acknowledged the cost. Family members who mourned him for 40 years, the wife who married a fiction, the isolation of living a comprehensive lie. But he maintained he'd made the right choice. "I survived," he said. "Many German prisoners sent back to Soviet zones died in camps. I lived. I built a life. I regret the pain I caused others, but I don't regret surviving." Georg Gärtner's grave bears both names. Georg Gärtner / Dennis Wiles, 1920 to 2013. The dual identity persists even in death. Georg Gärtner escaped Camp Deming by cutting through a fence, but his real escape took 40 years, the slow transformation from prisoner to citizen, from German to American. He didn't run to Mexico. He walked into America and stayed there, invisible through normalcy. The prisoner became American. And only when mortality made the secret unsustainable did he reveal the truth. That the most successful escape in American military history wasn't about running away. It was about disappearing into the ordinary, unremarkable fabric of American life, where one more working man attracted no attention at all. Georg Gärtner achieved the impossible by doing what no one expected. He stayed.